actually wanted to talk about America on the occasion of the 4th of July. This is what I wanted to stream about, but I figured you guys can just hear me. You don't need to see my face right now. And I think unpredictably, I'm seeing the majority of people claiming to be on the left, I guess, talk about how, the American Revolution was just something of a bunch of slave owners and rich landowners who wanted to just kill indigenous people and slaves and stuff like that. And I think there's something interesting kind of going on with the political alignment today. And I think that, firstly, I think there's an implicit and subconscious understanding by these people that the American Revolution, it couldn't be reduced to the interests of landowners and slave owners or all these kinds of things. There is an element of the mob that was there that really made it and this is what Lenin, he used this direct phrase to describe it. It was a genuine and authentic, like a real people's revolution. It was a real revolution of the people, right? And all of the major cities throughout the 13 colonies and throughout the 13 colonies in general, it was the common man who rose up, took up arms to expel an occupier. Now, you can talk to me about the political views of the founding fathers. You can talk to me about their personal circumstances, the fact that many of them owned slaves and many of them were very rich. That's fine. You can talk about the leadership of the American Revolution and explore the nuances of that. But before we do that, I just want to establish, so everyone's on the same page as far as the square one is concerned, that the American Revolution was a people's revolution. I'll give you an example. In Palestine today, some of you may not be the biggest fans of Hamas or the Muslim Brotherhood for ideological and political reasons. Okay, whatever. But the Palestinian resistance is a people's resistance, right? It's regular, ordinary people in Palestine trying to defend their olive trees and trying to defend their homes that are taking up arms against an occupier. I mean, you don't like the people who are leading it, whatever. But don't reduce the revolution to the ideological leadership and to the political leadership, because there's something authentic and irreducible about it, in the sense of reducing it to a political or ideological project. It's a community, it's a people rising up in arms to expel an occupier, right? It's families, it's communities, it's villages who all have a subconscious, intuitive, and very deep understanding, one that they feel in their stomach and they feel it in their gut, right? That there's an occupier here who is an enemy of our people, and we want to rise up and expel them and take our land back. That's not reducible to an ideology, okay? That's not an ideology. That's not a political form. There's something very real and material about that, which you can't put it in some kind of box, all right? That's an authentic national revolution. That's an awakening of a people. And what I'm trying to get through is the American Revolution was the exact same thing. It was a people's revolution. The people that were living in America, the ordinary, the common people, they were sick of the heavy taxes. They were sick of the monopolistic trade practices being imposed. They were sick of and this is an element and I would love for more research to be done on it. They were sick of the debt that was being imposed on them by British creditors. Not a lot of people know this, but a huge factor in the revolution was the expropriation of the land of the loyalists and the cancellation of all debts from Britain. All the debts from Britain were canceled and from loyalists were canceled. And one of the agreements, actually, of the peace treaty between the Patriots and the British was about the restoration of the rights of property to loyalists and the British and to creditors. And the Patriots said, okay, but they actually didn't fucking do it. And why didn't they do it? Because the common people in the colonies would take up arms and they weren't having any of it. They would not allow that to happen. So that's a clear example of the irreducibility of that revolution to the formalities of the founding fathers and their personal lives and their personal views. So that's square one I wanted to get to. Now, square two, as far as the founding fathers are concerned and the way that they're vilified, were many founding fathers slave owners? Yes. But, and it takes a lot of maturity and understanding in terms of how history works to get this. But although we may look back on that as a huge shortcoming of personal character, it has nothing to do with the historical significance of their actual views on slavery. Okay? It wasn't a good predictor on where you actually stood on the issue of slavery. Just because you're personally doing something doesn't mean you believe the future of national policy and laws should reflect that. Okay? It's really important people understand that. I mean, there were founding fathers who detested the institution of slavery and didn't want it to exist in America, who also personally owned slaves. Now, is that hypocritical? Sure, whatever. But you can't say that the aspiration to destroy and get rid of slavery was completely false and illegitimate and fake. That's just a stupid view where you're reducing politics to people's personal lives, and it's fucking nonsense is what it is, actually. Okay? The fact of the matter is this. If it was true that the American Revolution was a slaveholders' rebellion and a slaveholders' revolution, then why was it necessary for the founding fathers to have gone to such lengths to actually engage in so many compromises with the big holding states? And for example, the Declaration of Independence originally condemned slavery, and that was taken out later because they had to appease the southern colonies, who they needed strategically. They needed them to get rid of the British. I mean, understand, like in this scenario, there would have been no way to have a successful revolution against the British in their minds, like in their point of view, without having secured the support of these southern colonies. And unity was what was fundamental to them. Everything else, okay, that's for the future. But unity strategically at that time, the way they saw it, was fundamental. Now, looking back, I mean, could it have been possible to have immediately abolished slavery at the time? Actually, maybe. Maybe if the founding fathers were equipped with the immortal science of Marxism-Leninism and understood the laws, the historical laws of class struggle, they could have actually, they could have made the American Revolution a class struggle, and united the smallholding yeomen in the southern colonies and basically treat the big slaveholders as collaborators with the. I mean, that would have been a viable strategy, maybe. I'm not denying that, but the fact of the matter is that Marxism didn't exist at this time. The fact of the matter is that people need to really put things into perspective, because that's really what gets lost when people reflect on the American Revolution. Okay? This was the first political event in modern European and modern Western history which expressly asserted as the basis of state power the people, popular sovereignty. That was the first realization of the notion of popular sovereignty, which European political thinkers were writing about beforehand, but it was never a reality until the American Revolution. Even the English Civil War was an expressly religious war. It was a war fought on religious grounds. That was a war for God only, right? The Protestant wars, the wars of the Reformation, it was the same thing. Could you say that there's elements of revolutionary people's uprisings there? Yeah, sure. But the American Revolution, for the first time, established as the basis of state power the purport that, the people are the basis of power, not, the divine right of kings, not somebody's lineage, not someone's race, not someone's, religion, but the people in general are the basis of the power of the state. And that was enshrined in the very foundation of the Constitution. And it was there right at the beginning with the Declaration of Independence. Nobody's saying that the American Revolution holds up to the standard of what we would consider not only today's standards of what would be constituted as revolutionary, but even in the 19th century. I mean, look, I'll be the first to admit that the French Revolution was far more revolutionary and went farther, much farther than the American Revolution could even dream of. But without the American Revolution, would there have been a French Revolution? I doubt it. So, and we need to understand what the American Revolution accomplished. Did the American Revolution accomplish, something as radical as the French Revolution, where the property question was directly called into question? No, that revolution didn't accomplish that. But what it did accomplish was establishing popular sovereignty, rule by the people, as the basis of the state and of state power. And I really feel like people who don't consider that important take it for granted and don't realize that wasn't always the case. In Western European history, that wasn't always the case. Whatever issues you have with the racial situation and with slavery and with indigenous people, all legitimate. I'm not denying those criticisms are legitimate. Like, fine, that's no argument from me. But you're taking for granted how even the way you're in framing the argument, you're presupposing that all human beings are equal and deserve equal dignity and equal justice and treatment. Well, that purport that is only meaningful when it's held up to the standard of the very purport of that was established by the American Revolution itself. In European feudalism, when we live under the divine right of kings, it's not just that only a select few have rights. It's universal dignity and human rights. Nobody fucking has that. There's no rights of man for anyone, right? So it's meaningless to say that, the American Revolution, was completely illegitimate because of all of these problems. Well, they're only problems. You're only able to claim that they're problems because of the very standard that the American Revolution itself ushered in as far as what constitutes a just society and a legitimate state. By the very the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence, if you read it, if you read the founding documents that are the foundation of this country, if you they say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, yada yada. They didn't add any prefixes. They didn't add any conditions or specifications. That they didn't say white men. They didn't say this particular version of man. They said all men. They said all men. And what? You think because they weren't smart enough to know that, we really mean just white men? If that's what they ultimately and really meant, they would have said so. It's not the case. The fact is, they themselves held the view that slavery was a vestige of this older and more barbaric era that they hope eventually is not going to survive into the future. But what the American Revolution enshrined as the foundation of a new kind of state is a purport. It's an aspiration. It's a new standard. You call it an ideal if you want, right? To make it easier. And by the standard of that ideal and that purport, many of the institutions and many of the things that still characterized American society at that time immediately were clearly in contradiction with the spirit of that revolution. And the first abolitionists directly made appeals to that fact. It was known directly at the time. You know, so when I say that the American Revolution shouldn't be fully dismissed and regarded as illegitimate, you know, I'm not trying to underemphasize the various, injustices that were committed against, through the practice of slavery or against the indigenous people in America. I'm just trying to say that those were not new. The British had been doing that for hundreds of years. So were other European colonial powers. That was nothing new. But what was new was this new people's revolution that establishes a republic by, for, and of the people, or at least the purport for that kind of republic. Now, I keep saying purport, purport, purport. Now, most people, they hear that say, well, it's bullshit. You know, it's just what? It's just something it's a pretense, but it's not actually the reality. Well, here's the problem. That pretense, that ideal, and that purport is the only thing. It is the only thing that defines America as a unified nation. Without it, this is not a unified nation. There's no possibility that America is a unified nation. So to be clear, you got to draw a line in the sand. If you don't believe in the founding ideal of the American Revolution, you don't believe America is possible as a country. You don't believe it's possible for a people to become something greater than what they appear as or what they presently are defined by their circumstances. You are just going to say that, everyone is just going to be defined by whatever country they came from or whatever race they have, and that's it. There's no other reality. In which case, just admit you believe that the culmination of history as far as America is concerned is balkanization forever. Each race will have their own state based on what? Racialism and ethno-nationalism. Understand that this is the only thing that separates this country from every ethnicity and cultural group in this country, constituting itself as a separate political subject with its own microstate and its own enclaves, is the purport of popular sovereignty. And that's the only thing. And beyond that, there's no basis. And it doesn't sound very materialist, but it's just the truth. The only basis of a united America, of the United States of America, or an American nation in general, with so many different groups that come from so many different places across the world, was carried forth on the banner of the American Revolution of 1776. The view that the British were occupiers, that they were foreign occupiers, and that the people of this country belonged to that land, that you need to appreciate how unprecedented and how radical that was. Because more or less, the view was not I keep hearing this notion from Gerald Horne's followers that, like George Washington was just a land, everyone just wanted to get rich making land going out west, and the British were stopping them. And they just wanted to colonize the whole continent and just make money and get rich. And it's like, it's an extremely one-sided and reductionist view of things, because colonization and colonialism implies a clear core and periphery dynamic. So if you want to say the American Revolution was about the 13 colonies becoming a colonial core and colonizing the rest of the continent, we would have to hold that claim up to scrutiny. And if we hold that claim up to scrutiny, it's revealed that nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is that the founding fathers and the patriots and the American revolutionaries, they didn't have the goal to be colonizers. Their goal was actually to be part of this land, to build a completely new civilization and a completely new country here, and in a way that was totally independent from Europe. Now, notice why I say totally independent from Europe. Because someone may want to make the claim to me, Haz, what about Israel? Well, Israel doesn't have independence from the colonial core. Without the colonial core of Britain and America, there's no Israel. So we can immediately exclude that. Now, they may say, what about South Africa with the Boers? Do you even know what the origin of South Africa as a unified state is? Before South Africa becomes unified as a state, what you have are these disparate Boer republics, okay? Even then, the Boer republics had a relationship of dependency to the British and the Dutch. They never acquired independence. Had they acquired independence, they would have had to reckon with the national reality of where they were located in. And apartheid would not have been possible. And genocide wouldn't have been possible. They simply didn't have the numbers to do anything like that. The origins of South African apartheid lie with the British Empire. It's Britain that created South Africa as a unified state, as a colony initially. And then when it was granted independence, that was the vestige of not only a colony built by Britain with a political infrastructure and whatnot, but economically the relationship of dependence remained. America's story is very different from that. America, the American Revolution and the story of America is not the story of South Africa. It's not the story of Israel. There was a genuine and authentic aspiration to really and independently build a different type of country and a different type of civilization here. One that's future oriented, one that's not based in the shackles of the past, of feudalism and all the rubbish of Europe, but a clean slate. And a lot of this had to do with Puritanism, by the way, theologically, because it was the Puritans who believed more or less in a kind of theological counterpart to this, of a totally clean slate, free from, the depravity of the old world and corruption and so on and so on. But I digress. That's a separate kind of topic. But in any case, the foundation of this country, of what America is, it's not based on any kind of divine right of kings. It's not based on an accident of the past of, different tribes just, accidentally commingling in some certain specific kind of way. It's based directly in a future-oriented purport and pretense to unify a nation. And this is what's so paradoxical, and it sounds even ridiculous, but the basis of American unity is the idea of people uniting together itself, of different people, different particulars coming together through association and through their relations to become something greater than the sum of the parts. It's literally the slogan, e pluribus unum, out of many one, right? That's the foundation of what this country is. And if it sounds ambiguous, it's because it is ambiguous. Exactly what that looks like and what that means isn't entirely clear. But should that have something to do with the actual concrete relationship between the people that live here, their lineage, and the relationship they have to the actual land and the geography of America? Absolutely. And because we are entering a point in American history where we can't say the foundation of this country is just an ideal or just a purport any longer. The American people, through what the Midwestern Marx people call the three revolutions, which is what I like, the American Revolution, the Civil War, and then the Civil Rights Revolution, have gone through a historical journey and a historical experience such that they have been constituted as a particular people concretely. No longer are they just aspiring to build a new type of country. The country in question has, in many respects and many regards, been built, right? So now it's a question of recognizing exactly what has been built and exactly what America is. And I don't see a way for that to be possible without communism. I don't see how we can recognize the common reality we share in this country, the common history that's been established, that's culminated into the present, without the communist outlook and the communist worldview, which is explicitly about the recognition of the total integrity of history. And it's literally in the name, communism, the actual concrete common reality, and the social laws governing that reality. That is precisely what America is fated for. America will be communist or it will be nothing at all. And this much was even acknowledged by the first Marxists. It was even acknowledged by Soviet communists themselves. Everyone understood that America's destiny, in a way that wasn't even necessarily true for other countries in the West and in Europe, was communism. It's the only thing that can hold this country together going forward at this point in time. Because in order to understand the contradictions of American history between the purport of a unified nation and the various private and particular interests which conflict with that purport, there's nothing, and I'm open to hearing an alternative to this, but what else, if not Marx's critique of private property, suffices for understanding American history and its contradictions? But let's add re-ups who just requested. Yo, go
Okay,
ahead.
yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what's going on, little connection issues. But yeah, how you
Yeah,
doing?
good. How are you?
Yeah, interesting perspective, right? Interesting perspective. Little pushback. Um, I don't know if it's headed for communism, right? Maybe something different. America is a capitalistic country, right? Communism sounds more so like let's all share the pie, right? Socialism. I mean, we have an aspect of socialism. That's why I think this country is just a big social experiment, right? I'm more of the lines that the Constitution is a living document. It can be amended and changed. Um, Part of that and the foundation, like right, you mentioned the three things. I think the foundation of this country is just that: colonialism, capitalism, and hmm, um, protecting that, right? The main point of the revolution was taxation without representation, right? That was just about money, right? And not being able to have a voice with the king, right, with Britain. Um, I agree with you. I think Israel does not exist without America and or Britain, right? I think that's a symbiotic relationship. That's a whole conversation within itself. But as far as the foundation of this country, I mean, even in the Continental Convention, right? There's that whole three-fifths compromise, that big debate. However crazy it was, I think a lot of that's built on that. I think Black Americans, for the most part, made this country live up to its ideals, right? Through what Civil War, I mean, it's Reconstruction, it's civil rights, but communism, nah, I don't think that flies here, right? Um, I think we have our form of socialism again, but I don't see how. Can you explain that how America becomes a communist
Yeah,
country?
I can actually simplify it. So if the one thing that matters, all right, when it comes to money or economics, is it's not the paper currency itself, because that's not backed by anything, right? So they can print as much money as they want, it's worthless. What actually matters is the actual material wealth that exists objectively in this country. And the most fundamental form of that wealth is land. Okay. And if we want to talk about just immediately, why does the future have to be communism? Well, let's think about it like this. Do Americans have a stake in the land they live on? The land below their feet? Do they own that land? Who owns that land?
I
I mean,
mean,
who owns?
as long as you pay your taxes, right? Your property taxes.
But here's the issue: is that people pay their. This is the issue. People pay their taxes, right? But you got the majority of people paying other kinds of taxes. So we're paying taxes with debt. We're paying taxes with interest. We're paying taxes with mortgages. We're paying taxes, in terms of rent. We're paying rent to live in somewhere. That's
So
a
what I mean by that is if you pay off the debt, right, the mortgage on the land, the house or whatever you have on it, right, you don't refinance, right, take equity out. I mean, all after that, you just as long as you're taking care of your property taxes, you're okay. And I mean, again, that would be up to the individual how much debt one wants to get themselves in, right? Keeping up with the Joneses, whatever it is. Again, technically you own it, right? I mean, the government and the powers that be are always going to have a way to get something from under you. I mean, that's just the system, right? That's me understanding the system. But I mean, for the most
yeah.
part,
Because I
yeah,
don't. Yeah, I don't really think it's an individual thing. I mean, I think formally on paper it is, right? But when you have a situation where, the average debt owned by Americans is so insurmountable. The debt owed by the public itself through the government, it's over 30 trillion, right? So,
what is
I
it?
don't
22 trillion and some change is held by the taxpayers. The other 15 is intragovernmental lending. So I mean,
yeah, yeah.
even
So the
yeah, even that.
government itself is in debt to these people. So
I
the
mean,
you just
that's to
mentioned.
the taxpayers, right? To the American taxpayers, in the tune of $22 trillion, right? In taxes we pay. Right? This bitch is just on autopilot, if you ask my opinion. But even with that, right? I think that's very tricky, and we know it's a fiat currency, but I think that's just tricky accounting, right? We're talking about you're not balancing the budget every year, right? You're extending the debt. You know how we see it. It's plastered over the news, and I mean, it's just accrued over a period of time. Not sure how long it's accrued, but that's
But
literally
but
what that
but
debt
put
is.
it this way, right?
Hmm.
Put it this way: we have a government that we pay taxes to, and they make policy, and in return for us paying taxes we get quote unquote representation. So we get to vote, and we get to choose who's in Congress, and we get to basically have some kind of say in how the country is run on paper, right? But the issue is the government is in debt to these private banks. The whole people is in debt to these private banks. The whole economy is. And it's not just because individuals are making the wrong choices, because individuals can't survive out here without taking on this debt. And without this debt, the basis of the economy collapsed, because this is how the capitalists are making money, through fleecing the people through debt and interest and putting them into debt slavery. Now, here's the question we have to ask ourselves: how much power has this given these unaccountable, private, shadowy capitalists? We don't elect them. They control our policy because our government is in debt to them. They control everything about our economy because they got everybody under control. I mean, it's the same thing. We are being taxed without representation by the private capitalist class, which is also international. Keep that in mind. These are not even just Americans. This is an international capitalist class that controls this country. We get no say in it. We 1776 needs to happen again. We know no taxation without
So
representation.
I
We're
won't
being
go that
taxed.
far. See, I won't go that far, right? And I'm just speaking as a Black American, right? Knowing my family's history, right? Having my great grandfather, right, being one of the first Black representatives in Florida, right, during the Reconstruction. We've never, as a Black American, we've always been taxed without representation. That was a lot of it, right? Even paying into a system and not having per se access to that social safety net by way of Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare when it was started, right in the 30s. That's what I'm saying. Maybe not a 1776 revolution, but I mean that's why there is a way we do things with politics, with policy, um, and or voting people out of office. It's very alarming to hear people, and this is just as an American and knowing the ideals of America, right? That American exceptionalism, and it is a bit of a melting pot, right? That's just we've had influxes of immigration in this country has happened, but for the most part, the Irish, the Italian, uh, Eastern, Western Europeans that did come over here, I mean, they assimilated under whiteness, right? It wasn't until after the '60s where quote unquote brown and people of color were then let in. That was after civil rights. That's a part of that American idealism, right? Just assimilating and being American capitalism, the American dream. I get you with the debt, slavery, and stuff, but uh, that's a just separate conversation of how these central banks and that even entered in the country, right? And the role that a specific Zionist group played in that. I mean, but if you understand, if you follow what I'm saying, but I mean, that's just the way this system works, right? That's why I don't know.
But this the system is tearing the country apart. It's taking the country down a path, where there isn't going to be a United States because it's unsustainable.
Well, I
That's the
think that
issue.
that's part of the experiment, right? I think there's give and take. You go, you course correct. I mean, we're humans. I think that's just where it is. It'll be this. I mean, I think things have been worse historically in this country, right? Um,
Well,
Not
I, I
and to your point about balkanization, right? I think we've always been segregated in this country. We lived as a segregated country when it comes to black and white, and we still do it. There's Irish hoes, there's Chinatowns, there's black communities, white community, majority white communities, sundown towns, right? We've all that's just America. America. Um, so
so let
I
me ask your opinion. Do you think the American experiment has failed? Do you think it should be? You think it should be just finally let off and everyone should go their own way, racially speaking, or what?
no. I think as humans we'll figure it out, right? If it gets to a point of war, if it gets to a point of which I hope it doesn't go to that point, right? But if it gets to a point of where something's orchestrated, where it brings you together. I mean, the last time I really did see Americans come together as Americans, right? Even though 9/11 is its own conversation, was actually 9/11, right? That's the last time, and I mean, I was a freshman in high school, but this is the last time I actually saw America come together as a united nation, right? Dropping a lot of bullshit. As orchestrated as it was, you can have your own say, but I think that's more so how, and you can say it sounds cheesy, but I think that's really the experiment of America, right? Even though we don't need to manufacture any more enemies and start any more shit, right? But I don't know. That's a conversation between how bad does the general public want to right the ship. I see that happening more, even on spaces. I see more people being quote unquote woke, even though I hate that word and how it's been co-opted, right? Um, but it'll be a course correction. People go too far left, and then I mean, as human beings, we'll get it. We'll get it right. Um,
So, so you don't think the debt problem is going to destroy the country?
no, the United States has the biggest military for a reason. Um, and no, I don't think it'll destroy it. No, no.
I mean that. So, but see, debt is about who owns what. So we can have the biggest military, but if we all become basically serfs, we all lose our rights politically, and we're controlled by an oligarchy or we're controlled by some kind of junta. At what point do the American people rise up and take their rights back to have a say? I mean, do you just think that nobody should care about that? That sovereignty isn't important? I mean, look, you told me you come from foundational black lineage, correct?
Yes, yes. Hmm.
So I understand what you're saying, that your people have always been denied representation and a stake in the pie. By the way, after the Civil War, there's a reason why they said 40 acres and a mule, because they know that if people were slaves and you want to make them free men, you can't just be free by having rights on paper. You have to be free having your own foundation to stand on, which for them was 40 acres and a mule,
Well,
right?
yeah, that and I mean the fastest way to wealth in America is what? Land and
Land,
or own
land.
home ownership, right?
Yeah, yeah, same thing.
Correct.
And
So
but what happens when you don't have land? You go into debt. That's the whole source of it. You take on debt because you can't make you can't make your own way. You can't support your own way. So you go into debt. So I agree. Black people were always victims of that debt slavery and that stuff. And then white people, they started to, and then with the GI Bill and the housing, from the New Deal 30s, 40s, 50s, for a time, white people were able to have their own homes and have it all. And but look what's happened, look what's happened in the past decades. Even white people are losing that. So this is why I think Americans, there's a new opportunity for Americans to come
and see,
together.
and that's where I think you got it. Um, it's different when it touches white America, right? In this country, when white America feels it, right? You get shit like January 6th, right? It's going to rear its head, and that's why I say, uh,
Yeah,
it'll
I
all
mean,
be figured
I,
out. It
I,
all,
I mean,
you
look,
know.
what white people, they're the majority. So obviously, and but no, I agree. That it gets felt more because they're not as used to it. But don't you think Americans, don't you think now is the time for them to come together to reassert their rights, to free themselves from this debt slavery? Because to me, that's what communism is. It's raising the property question, because the minute you say, let's cancel the debts and let's give Americans land so they have
So I think
opportunity.
it might be almost too late, right? I'm on the belief that this system literally is in autopilot, right? We should have been having this conversation probably maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe after the Great Recession. One more
Well,
good crash, recession, interest rate hike. I mean, who knows what it'll be?
oh,
But I think
it's
one
good. It's
more.
going to happen. I mean, look, I'm operating under the assumption that the United States is going to dissolve. I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, you may not see that same way, but just for the sake of argument, just assume it is. Let's say this country goes to total shit, ground zero. Do you think this country should be reunited on a new basis, or should it just be left, and have NATO come here and have us be under occupation? I mean, because we're gonna have to come together as a people and rebuild this country, because this whole thing is gonna come crashing down. And the
Haz,
way I see it, yeah, shut up for a second. I'm talking to this other guy. Go ahead, mute
hold on, but
yourself.
I got a question for you.
Nah, well, it's not your time yet. Go ahead, Reubs. What do you think?
Shit. That's I never really even thought to think that far. Um, Damn, that's a good one. Ooh,
Because that's where I'm
ooh.
coming. See, where I'm coming from when I say America's destiny is communism is, I'm saying the United States, the system we have now, that's going to collapse. That's going to be gone. So if America is going to have a future, it's destined for communism. That's the only way we're going to be able to come back together.
Haz, what are we gonna come together on? What does that mean?
So you come
I
together. I
told
mean,
you, yeah.
if I can, because and that's the point, right? During the Poor People's Campaign, right? Shout out to Martin Luther King. I think that's what he was more so touching on, the
Yep.
class issue, right?
Yep.
I think that was ignored. He was
They
being
killed him for that. That's why they killed
correct.
him.
Yeah, and him, the United States government felt he should have been sticking to maybe domestic politics and politics in his community. You should not speak about the war effort or what's going on in Vietnam, right? Um, mm, that now when you're talking about this class issue, bingo, that's a problem, right? We talk about repair to the community, that's a problem. And I think that the way the system works and the way they assassinate people's character, that was done. And that's why I say this conversation, it should have been had decades ago. I think it may be a little too far gone. I
I
never
mean,
thought, and I never put it to the point where you know, to think, damn, what happens after or if, right? So maybe that's a.
I mean, in a sense, I see where you're coming from because yeah, in a sense, as far as this being able to be done within the system, yeah, I mean that time has passed. I mean, I'm operating under the assumption, this whole thing's gonna come crashing down, and in a lot of ways, it's gonna be bad, it's gonna be ugly, but I mean, it's been a long time coming. I mean, look, we got a really wicked government. You just mentioned, they killed Dr. King. They killed a whole lot of other people. They've done a whole lot of bad things, and this is not going to last forever. And it is going to come crashing down, and we're going to be left. It's going to be on to us to pick up the pieces and take responsibility. But I mean, you're right in the sense that I don't think we're going to be able to elect our way into a solution. I don't think it can be fixed, as it stands. I think before it can be fixed, it's got to come crashing down, and I sincerely believe that.
I may have to agree with you on that point. May have to agree with you on that point. But good conversation. I did shoot you a follow. Yeah, I'll be definitely coming through if you open up more
All
spaces
right,
like
for
these
sure.
conversations.
Hey, thank you, Re-Ups. I appreciate you, man. Appreciate you coming up. Appreciate your contribution. Thanks for stimulating the discussion. Now let's get to this guy. His name is Replace the Jews. Now that's going to be interesting. All right. Go ahead and now you can ask your question. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, so I was wondering because I am interested in the communist kind of socialist aspect of it because I think I actually agree on a lot. I feel like a lot of the problem in the country it does come from the central banking. And without hopping immediately into like the Jewish
Yeah,
topic, we don't have to talk
you
about
just
that.
want to replace the
No,
the
no, no. So,
minority of
but my point is, I'm curious. With communism, what exactly do you plan to come together on the basis of what? Because it was efficacious in the Soviet Union through the Bolsheviks, I guess if you want to, if you want to call that before the communist Marxist idea kind of took root. I mean, what exactly are you uniting on the basis of what exactly? Because America's very diverse. We really don't even speak the same language. We have a lot of Spanish speakers. Um, so we have no common language. The religion is becoming less and less important in people's lives. So I was just curious, kind of like what does that mean? Communism, because there's already a bunch of sort of small communes in America. I mean, you could say Salt Lake City is a giant commune of Mormons living, just living in Utah. You could say that
I think when
California,
you
the
say
South,
that there's no shared American character, this is what
that's
I'm
what I'm saying.
assuming
Yeah.
you're getting at. I think that's a huge exaggeration. I think yeah, Spanish is a secondary language, but you know what? I mean, a lot of mega big states have secondary languages. If you go in Europe, not everyone just only speaks one language. Germans might know how to speak French and vice versa, and they all know how to speak English. So, I mean, yeah, is Spanish spoken in this country? I mean, it makes sense that it is because we border Mexico. It's right on our border. I mean, geographically, it makes sense. But English is still the primary language. I think it's an exaggeration that, religiously speaking, the country doesn't have it shared. I think America's religious character has always, even today, the foundations were the Puritans, and that remains the case today. Are there other religious groups here? Sure, but even those religious groups are standing on a religious foundation and spiritual, orientation that has been laid by the Puritans. The whole notion of America as an ideal, as a, this common future we share, a, united republic, a clean slate, all of these things that's irregardless of all these different particulars. I mean, these are rooted in a shared theological and metaphysical horizon, which I think most Americans even today continue to take for granted. Are there a lot of differences among Americans? Yes. Are there a lot of differences among Russians? Yes, there are. You go to Moscow; it's an extremely diverse city. Are there differences among the Chinese? Yeah. Are there differences in Iran? Absolutely. There's Azeris. There's all sorts of Kurds, all sorts of different ethnic groups. The test of a great civilization and a great state is to be able to unite on the basis of the recognition, a particular form of recognition of differences. And my view about of what is going to unite America is that Americans share a history. There is a common history that is at the foundation of this country as a nation, and that's still there. Yeah, sure, there's all these differences you're talking about, but they're not arbitrary differences. You want to talk about difference between black and white. That's a concrete history of different people entering into association with each other and having a very specific relationship. Same thing is true for like the Mexicans or whatever. Now, the way I see it, Americans basically have three main groups. There's whites and there's black, foundational black Americans, and then there's Mexicans, right? The other, I mean, I don't know how this would be broken down demographically, but I would guess that those three combined would probably, in relation to the whole of America, at minimum, be the same percentage of like great Russians compared to the rest of the people in the Soviet Union or the Empire, which is good enough, as for as far as constituting a dominant ethnic group, or I should rather say different ethnic groups that are in the process of an ethnogenesis. But those are the main groups that form the foundation of the American people. Other groups from other places around the world. I mean, I'm sure I'm also missing the indigenous people. I mean, yeah, they're also there too. But and they're also very rural as well. So like it's very very much a deep foundational thing. But beyond that, other immigration groups coming here from around the world for a bunch of different reasons. Those are kind of just more a peripheral and marginal element, and I have the opinion that they are going to have to basically assimilate to American history, or they're just here for a speculative gambit, and they're not really here to fully commit to it. I'm not necessarily saying that's the case, but for example, a lot of Brahmins from India come to America to get high paying tech jobs. They don't come here to be construction workers and actually work the land and be laborers. They just come here purely to get these salaried, kind of like PMC jobs. Do I think that when shit hits the fan in this country, they are going to reliably assimilate into a unified American national existence? I mean, probably not. They're probably just going to go back to where they came from. Not all of them, but some, a huge portion of them at least. So, I think we've entered a stage of American history where I don't actually think it's true that we can say, oh yeah, America is just like a indiscriminate melting pot. No, I mean, the three groups that I just mentioned are not on the same level as far as America's history is concerned as like, people, some random, you know, refugee from Romania fleeing communism. That person is just looking at America. See, America has always served a dual role. Like, on the one hand, it's a people struggling to acquire a definite and concrete historical existence. On the other hand, it's a kind of speculative asset that people from around the world have used to basically escape, their societies and their communal contexts, and maybe turn a buck and, scam the people here and then, run back somewhere with their tail between their legs. I mean, one of the reasons we're such an individualistic country, actually, is because we are so distrusting of any form of collective existence, because usually, these have historically taken the forms of cults and communes. And multi-level marketing schemes. Usually these are scams, and they end in some guy scamming everyone, selling them out, and running away with all the money they collected. Whether it's these like mega churches, evangelical mega churches, or it's some communes. Or on Netflix, there's this documentary about some South Korean pastor who went to Los Angeles and created like a TikTok cult. So more or less, it's like, it's still on, it's a great example. It's like every form of collective existence of this country is used to exploit the people, it's used to exploit them. And that's why Americans are so individualistic, because, the only thing they have to fall back on is their individual existence, that they can always go back to. But I think we're entering a period of history in America where this individualism is reaching its limit, and America as a collective existence is struggling to be born and to come into being. And I'm not saying that excludes any groups, but I can still recognize, the larger patterns of history that, there are some groups here that have a longer history than others, and therefore are, probably more represented in this process than others might. I doubt a Romanian anti-communist refugee is as committed to the American national project, as somebody whose ancestors have been here for centuries. And to be fair, that even applies to people from my own, ethnic group. It's not a generalization where you can say, oh, it's everybody, but it's fair to say, that you can basically assess that there is a history. I'm all trying to say there's a definite history in this country. Are there immigrant groups that come from elsewhere that could be a part of that history in the future? Sure, there's no telling. All we can work off of for now is the history that has been made and that exists now. But all I'm trying to say is that history is there, and it's an American history. It's a single American history, and there's no other context with which to define it except that it's American. There's nothing else that unites all these different groups and all of the shared experiences they have in terms of the way in which they've come into association and mutually defined each other's cultures and and realities, except that it's an American history. So if you're asking like what's going to be the basis of communism or what's going to be the basis of a revolution here, it's going to be a people's revolution. It's going to be a revolution of people uniting on the basis of a common, not just historical existence shared by the past, but oriented toward the future of realizing America as one nation and one people.
Right. And so then we agree, okay, so the history of America, right, is Protestantism founded by Puritans, like you say, and so basically Protestantism, it's a Protestant country. I mean, let's just cut right to the chase. When you
No,
say what
I
is an
have to be
American,
more
it's a
specific and
it's a
say
white
Puritan,
a
because
white, historically white Protestant nation, right? So wouldn't it make sense to sort of rally on the basis of what the actual history of the actual country was, which is
because
basically,
because
and I'm not a
no,
Protestant
because
either. I'm Catholic, so
you're jumping to the case. You're jumping the gun because you say, "Oh, it's just Protestant." No, it's not just Protestant. The Netherlands is Protestant, and Germany is a Protestant country, and that doesn't mean they're the same as America. Okay, America specifically, I said Puritanism, and the difference with Puritanism is that in the Puritan the Puritan metaphysical horizon affords no privileged status to these kind of arbitrary parochial particulars. This is why America has always been incompatible with any kind of ethnocentrism, because ethnocentrism within the Puritan horizon is a form of idolatry. It's this. It is a way of. It is a way of basically. I don't know what else would be a better word to use, but it's a way to reify. The horizon of the divine and the sacred. So I don't. I think it's the interesting thing about white nationalism in America is that it has two forms. One of the forms is a foreign and un-American pan-Europeanism, which I think you would subscribe to, you would fall under the banner of, because your name is Replace the Jews. Well, you're a Catholic, and I'm sorry to tell you that according to the parochial particularism that you just mentioned of WASPs, you are the same as a Jew, as a Catholic. You are just as much a foreign, element in this country. But the other form of white nationalism is this kind of just vicious, vicious. I don't know how I would put it. Kind of a white nationalism of total depravity. That would be the one, the Protestant kind, which is based on extremism and cruelty and punk rock and skinheads and shit like that. And that is a kind of way to bask in the total depravity of the world. And it's explicitly based on this very juvenile and infantile worship of hatred and all of what are they themselves acknowledging as the lower and baser and meaner aspects of human of existence. Basically, it's basically a form of like Protestant Satanism. So these are the two forms of white nationalism in America. One is un-American, and the other is a kind of juvenile Satanism. Go ahead. Go ahead, unmute you.
Yeah, so I didn't say I was a white nationalist, Oz. I didn't say I wanted some kind of weird white racial supremacy in America. I was just saying we acknowledge that America's history is founded by Europeans and also they happen to be Protestant. That's just true. I don't understand why you have to take it to this weird like, oh, this white racial supremacy and blah blah blah. I'm just talking about the history of the country. And like you're talking about, oh, like that's such a
Yeah,
foreign
but
thing, but then you're bringing communism,
yeah,
which is a foreign ideology. What
I
does that
don't I
even
don't
mean?
think I don't think it's foreign at all. I think that America, some of the first forms of communism, and this is what Frederick Engels directly said, were actually in America. And American experiments, before there was a word called communism, literally were the inspiration for the thinkers in Europe who coined the term communism. So, no, it's not foreign. It's as an American as apple pie. And second of all, the reason I'm kind of jumping the gun with all this other stuff is because I'm just basically trying to point out that if if you're going to say that the root and the foundation is something established in the past, that is radically incompatible with the purport of an independent American nation. If something established in the past is going to be the basis of a state, the founding fathers in 1776 had absolutely no right to rebel against the British because according to the bonds established by the past, America was a British colony. They were, for all intents and purposes, ethnically speaking, Englishmen, right? There was no legitimate historical basis for the American Revolution if we accept and submit to the metaphysical assumptions you are claiming we should have for America today. So your view, or your devil's advocate, it may not be your view. You may just be playing the devil's advocate. My response would be that it's radically in contradiction to the very purport of an American nation itself.
Okay, so you're saying the history of the country doesn't matter then, and okay, we're looking to the future. Okay, fine.
No,
So then the
it's
future
something
is what exactly?
it's something a little more complex. Again, you're jumping the gun. It's not that the past doesn't matter. It's actually more difficult to understand for you, I imagine, right? Because you like to think in simple ways. I mean, your name is replaced to Jews. I doubt you have a very profound outlook on the nature of existence in general in the world, but no, it's that we have a history that is precisely based on the attempt to acquire an existence that is based in a specific outlook toward the future. And that's different. It's not just, oh, the past doesn't matter, all that matters is the future. It's that our past is based on a specific horizon of the future. Our past is based on a looking towards the future. That is what defines the very real fact of American history. What you're really trying to say is at what point has American history actually been established such that there's a legitimate, particular, and concrete American nation? Is it always just searching to create itself in the future? Or at a certain point in time, was it created before to draw legitimation from? But this is why America's existence was scandalous, not just for America, but for the whole world, because it was challenging the disgusting and filthy, barbaric European, not European in general, but the European ruling classes. They had this incestuous, necrophiliac, anti-human, and even I would say satanic view, according to which, yes, that everything that exists now was established at some past time, and so the horizon of future, the future was totally suspended, and monarchs are claiming legitimacy from decades ago or something or centuries ago, and but there is no point in the past in the history of any country where you can say this is where the nation acquires a concrete existence. This is where it exists. The reality of a nation is always suspended in the challenge of meeting the future. And if you're unable to meet that challenge, if you're unable to acquire an existence facing the future, you don't exist, right? Because because like Olag the goat rapist decided to pillage some kind of coastal village in 950 AD once. That's not the foundation of a nation, all right? The foundation of a nation is something more metaphysically profound and lofty than just this nonsense particularism that was the ailment and sickness of Europe. Remember, Europe itself was a fresh civilization. Say 1500 years, to be generous, was the time span of European civilization. That's actually not a lot. It's not a lot. I mean, if you look at civilization in that characterized Rome and Greece and Persia and Egypt and the Fertile Crescent, you are talking about several millennia, several millennia, right? It's several millennia that's culminating in the Roman Empire, drawing from all of these very ancient civilizations. Okay, Europe was brought into the fold very recently compared to the rest of the world as far as civilization was concerned. Let's say if we're just saying like 1000 AD, right? 1000 AD, beginning in the Middle Ages, Europe is still half barbaric, and the vestiges of civilization are coming from Rome. Now, Europe itself starts to acquire civilization with the Protestant Reformation, right? This is the kind of Germanic, Nordic peoples starting to acquire more independence from their southern colonizers, more or less. And then also France is constituting itself as a very large and, viable, legitimate state, or even empire, if you want to call it that, right? And meanwhile, the Holy Roman Empire, I mean, it's just a disaster. It's a total disaster. I mean, Europe on the eve of the American Revolution is totally balkanized, fractured, and splintered, and thousands of different principalities and microstates. It's in a state of total disarray and a kind of civilizational crisis, even in contrast to the norm of mankind's history, where large landed integral regional empires and civilizations were the norm. So America was precisely a response to the crisis of Europe and a way to reject the illness of Europe and build something not just new, but ironically enough, more in conformity with the norm of history itself. Go ahead, I'll unmute you. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Right. Okay. Okay. So if I'm understanding that whole history lesson you just gave, you're basically saying that Americans are going to rally around a American idea of the future. I mean, very kind of boiling like that entire sort of meandering speech down to an actual concrete topic here. Like,
See, with these snide remarks and these little insults, it's just not going to slide. You clearly don't have the intelligence to comprehend what I'm saying. You're saying I'm just meandering. Oh, you're just words, just freaking words. Like, you're basically saying Americans are just going to rally around the idea of an American future. And it's like, that's it though. Because why? Why is the content missing for you? Because you don't understand America. You don't understand anything about America. America can't be reduced to a few phrases and a few words. It's clearly a shared common nation, common historical reality, and common experience that people in this country share. Whether that can be reduced to a few phrases that satisfy your standard of concreteness or not, this is a real fucking nation. I mean, what are you looking for, the right magic phrase that's going to unite the country? Or are you asking the question of whether there is a concrete historical reality that unites this country? Because there is. You're saying, what, the thing that's going to rally Americans together is a shared American future? I mean, like, that's just a generality. Like, in particular, clearly it'll be more than that. I mean, clearly it's probably going to be something more along the lines of, I just mentioned it. We can speculate all we want. It's going to be communism. It's going to be debt cancellation. It's going to be reindustrialization. It's going to be a total overhaul and reconstitution of popular sovereignty and government in this country, in accordance with our specific and particular conditions. It's going to be the process of unifying the people of this country with their very specific differences into one people as far as their popular sovereignty is concerned. I mean, you're acting all snide and arrogant, but you don't even know what fucking question you're asking. It's pretty pathetic. I'll let you go ahead and be a speaker again. Go ahead, you're unmuted.
okay, thank you. But you keep cutting me off when I'm trying to make a point here.
You're just gibbering a little too much, and making, immediately drawing false conclusions. So you have to draw a correct conclusion. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Okay.
Either
Yeah,
draw
so
a
I mean,
correct conclusion or ask me if that's what I mean. Don't say, "Oh, this
okay,
is what
fine,
you really
fair.
mean," and it's
Okay,
not something I mean at all, you
that's fine.
know?
That's fine. What? Okay, so with communism, I'm curious. So what exactly is like the next like concrete step of how like, for example, there's a lot of racial tension in America between let's just say white people, black people. There's illegal immigrants. There's a lot of differences, a lot of seemingly irreconcilable differences. We've had problems with race in this country, like the black gentleman was talking about earlier. I mean, since its inception, it's been slavery, it's been the Jim Crow laws, discrimination, whatever, and that's with the black, that's with the black population that's been here basically since the beginning, or at least for hundreds of years. And now we have this new problem of millions of illegal immigrants and people that are just generally from Asia, Europe, Africa, everywhere. And so it's like I'm trying to understand how exactly is not the ism, but I mean concretely what is gonna bring all these people together. You're saying that everyone's gonna come together on the basis of like there's gonna be a better economy for everybody. I mean, everybody has a different opinion on that. The immigrants obviously vote one way. The you could say founding stock Americans, WASPs, they vote a completely different way, and it's because they have a completely different ideology, and it's because they're foreign. So, so I'm like, I guess my concrete question to you, and not to be, not to be snide or anything like that. I was just, I'm trying to make a point here. But so the concrete question is, I mean, what specifically is gonna bridge that gap? I mean, if literally there's people in the country that don't even speak the same language, and you could say, oh, Russia and all these other countries are so diverse. Everyone in Germany speaks German. Everyone in France speaks France. Everyone in China speaks Han Chinese. It's like 90% ethnically, racially Han Chinese. I mean, they don't have the same demographic profile that we do. So it's kind of hard to compare the American demographic cultural diversity with a country like China. China's not as diverse. Like, yes, there are Uyghurs, yes, there are Tibetans if you consider them different, but it's still almost entirely Han Chinese. I mean, Russia's got their own system where they have a sort of European Christian core, and then they have other semi-autonomous sovereign populations within Russia. Um, yeah, so I guess what kind of government structure are you looking at? Are you looking at more like Russia, China? Because not to be insulting, but I'm just looking at it. It seems like a lot of abstract. I'm just asking for something concrete. Is the question?
All right, so I have your question. And I think there's an assumption that I think you're making implicitly, which is exactly what I reject and what I think communism is the response to, which is the assumption that these differences you're talking about are arbitrary and irrational and meaningless differences. And it may sound strange what I'm saying, but it'll make sense in a second if you let me explain. For example, when we talk about the different groups that exist in America, it's not just that you have different groups that are their own celestial bodies totally isolated from each other, and then the question is, how do we bring them together and how do we force them to be one people? It's more like all of these groups are fitting together in this puzzle in a very specific way and have a very specific relationship with each other. So, for example, European Americans and Black Americans, that is not the same difference as the difference between these Americans that I just mentioned and illegal immigrants from around the world. That's not the same thing. Just because they're different ethnic groups and we're putting them in that box ethnic group doesn't mean the whole thing comes together and fits together in the same way. So I don't believe that everyone's just going to come together at the expense of their differences. I rather have the belief, which I think is at this point fundamental as far as belief in American national identity, this faith that there is a rational and meaningful thing that unites all of these people on the basis of their differences, on the basis of those differences themselves, like all of it fits within some specific form of historical logic, that is the only thing that could justify the purport of an American national identity. So I do believe, this is a very specific puzzle that makes sense in the end. Like, for example, and not to be reductionist because there's so much more to it, but a lot of the national differences, and that's not to say they're separate nations, it's just a difference within the nation between Black Americans descended from slaves and white Americans, is the fact that Black Americans didn't get the 40 acres and a mule that provides the foundation of actual citizenship and nationhood within the sphere of civil society. They had legal citizenship that's formal on the, recognized on paper by the state, but in the sphere of civil society, they didn't have a stake in the actual state, as a people, and that's very important. It made it so that they were in a permanent state of dependency. It made it so that they lacked the opportunities to be Americans in the same way others were Americans. They did not have the same rights as others, even if they had them formally and legally. Concretely and in practice, they did not. Okay. So, I mean, how does that fit within the puzzle of this general problem then? Is it just reparations solves everything? No, it's more like the particularity is what defines the universal predicament. Because it's not just that Black people were picked on, and it's not just that indigenous Americans, for that matter, were picked on and given horrible reservations while white people were living it up, right? It's more that there was no recognition of the sphere of civil society or our common social reality, our common social economic reality as a sphere of meaningful national reality. That was never given political recognition. It's only ever been given political recognition historically by communists and socialists. That's the whole basis of the name communism and socialism, is recognizing that specific sphere of what constitutes a people. See, the Marxist view, and yes, this is meandering, but it's important you become educated, is that in the bourgeois and liberal conception, the only thing that unites a people together and allows them to have sovereignty and so on and rights is formal political unity and equality and sovereignty and formal procedures of governance and having an ability to have a say in that government and being able to vote and so on and so on. That's the formal and abstract sphere of laws, right? It doesn't address or recognize the sphere of how people actually feed themselves and produce things and exist materially, because that was consigned purely to the sphere of civil society and was not it wasn't in any way, at least in the kind of laissez-faire liberal view, it wasn't considered, absolutely decisive as far as a shared national existence and reality is concerned. So that is a very clear way in which communism directly addresses the kind of national differences and racial problems within America, is first of all acknowledge how land ownership, first of all, was an indispensable fact of American national identity and national existence. First of all, but even white people were not entitled to universal land ownership. And as a matter of fact, if you study the history of American whites and smallholding yeomen, farmers, and smallholders through Andrew Jackson and through the 19th century is a gradual and in some cases rapid process of white farmers, American farmers, being alienated from their means of production and being proletarianized. And by the way, it's something still happening today, except not just farmers, but people who have steady, reliable middle class jobs through industrialization. They were alienated from their means of production and their steady social safety nets, and they were thrown into this kind of economic wilderness. So, what was always missing in American history was that economic Bill of Rights that FDR kind of talked about at the end of his presidency, for example. That was always missing, even for white people. That white people had it better than black people or indigenous people and others. That was a circumstantial fact of history, but it wasn't as though they had that right enshrined anywhere politically. It's just that they had ancestors who owned land before, and in terms of the class struggle of the white smallholder to want to maintain their land or free themselves from debt and struggle against the large landowner and the banker, race was used as a tool actually for the big landowners and for the bankers and for the capitalists when it became a labor dispute through union struggles to basically divide, not just divide the people, but more specifically direct the energies of the white common man toward black people and toward other races to get the heat off of themselves. By the way, it's something that still happens even today. So it's not that America's racial and national reality is meaningless and arbitrary. It follows and obeys a very specific logic and specific rationality. And my view is it's communism which precisely solves that puzzle and unlocks that logic and articulates that logic directly, such that it can lead to and directly correspond to the realization of a unified American nation, of one American people. Now, there's something else you mentioned, which is about this issue of immigrants. Again, even the immigration issue, it's too broad of a brush. Are Mexican immigrants who, historically speaking, have always come as seasonal laborers, even for hundreds of years. It's always been a norm. Are those immigrants the same as people coming from all around the world, from India, from Turkey, wherever, through the border to just come here and make some money or whatever? No, this is a qualitatively different form of immigration. And the root cause of America, of mass immigration, what we would think of as an irrational mass immigration of people just coming here who have no regard for the land, who have no regard for the historical existence of America, who have no regard whatsoever for wanting to even participate in a shared national project. The root cause of that, of course, is related to what I just talked about before in the exact same way. Because we still treat this land as a speculative asset that we're going to turn a dime on and flip it and eventually retreat to some safe haven elsewhere from eventually. That same kind of capitalistic logic corresponds to mass immigration, where people are just coming here from around the world, like Brahmins from India, just to become doctors or something, to turn a dime and then go back home, with more money or something. Is that a way that this land and its resources and its wealth is being abused and exploited? Yes, I think it is. But on the other hand, I don't think that it's the immigrants who are to blame for that. People around the world are going to try to make money by any means possible. That's the nature of the world we live in. But it's a consequence of us as a people not having a sense of recognition of our shared and common economic reality. That we have a common economic reality of shared material wealth that we all create that is ours. It's ours as Americans. We don't have that recognition. We don't acknowledge that fact. So, of course, everyone from around the world is going to exploit and make a dime off of us and try to abuse and exploit this land as much as they can. And by the way, it's interrelated with the fact that, of course, this country is being used as a weapon um, to maintain a global empire. to maintain the global capitalist system itself by force, by gunpoint even, toward other countries. So you see, it's precisely American communism which can recognize the actual material shared national reality we share, that one addresses and recognizes the racial antagonisms you're alluding to. Two, is directly formed in response to the kind of conflict of interest between America as an empire and the sovereign interests of the American people, which simultaneously also has implications as far as mass immigration is concerned. There is much less cause for mass immigration if we're not a global empire. How can we be a global empire that tries to control all of these countries around the world and boss them around, but then simultaneously tell them that, oh no, this country is only for us Americans? No, we are volunteering everything we are for the whole world because the elites want to control the world and they don't care about us as the people. They consider us Americans as subjects on the same level as foreign countries that they control. We're just subjects with no rights whatsoever. So how can we reclaim those rights? All of these things are interrelated, and they're not interrelated in an intersectional way, which is what these kind of liberals say. They're related in a very concrete, rational way. And that would be my point, You're asking the question, how can Americans come together in spite of all these differences? My answer is it's not in spite of the differences. It's because of these differences. It's just that the differences need to be recognized in a concrete and rational way. And you will see that the content of that recognition is communism. Go ahead, I'll unmute you.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right, it's really late, so we're gonna wrap up here. And I want to
Thanks.
say a final comment on the
Thanks for
American.
having me on, Haz.
Yeah, no problem. I want to say a final comment on the American Revolution because something I notice about a lot of the demonization of the revolution by these kind of liberal leftists is it's very much leading up to Meghan Markle 2028, because when they say that, oh, the Americans, it's like January 6th, they're a bunch of reactionary, backward, it's a mob of racists and deplorables and stuff. It's like, I mean, qualitatively, how is that different from the like Edmund Burke and the conservative and reactionaries who denounced the French Revolution? How is it different? How is that not a kind of aristocratic, elitist position where you're going to go ahead and say that you're educated and you know it all, and everybody else, because they're not as educated and enlightened as you, are beneath you somehow? I mean, that's exactly what's going to lead to this idea that they're trying to prepare for us, and it's going to come. I think I'm still holding to this prediction that we need a Meghan Markle queen. We need to get rid of the republic. We need to have a monarchy, an enlightened monarchy, where Meghan Markle is going to be the queen, and basically, she's going to set everybody in line and set everybody straight. Of course, it's not going to be her. It's going to be the British royal family. I don't know if that's too conspiratorial, but it's setting it up for. I mean, I don't know if you guys see this trope in media, but it's against the mob, it's against the people, and it's always there's the enlightened noble, there's the enlightened aristocrat, and it's a directly reaction. The real sense of the word reactionary, it's like the Alexis de Tocqueville guy or Edmund Burke or all these other kinds of, even Carlyle, whatever, reactionaries who rejected, the revolutionary traditions. The revolutionary tradition was not between enlightened liberals. Tariq is here. Wow, what an honor.